Hi, I'm Annalise Stratman, and I'm a project manager for the Knowledge Hub at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children at Western University. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining our webinar series that is co-hosted by the Learning Network and the Knowledge Hub. The Learning Network is a knowledge mobilization initiative that bridges the gap between current gender-based violence research, practice-based knowledge, and lived experience, strengthening the capacity of the GBV sector and movement. Mobilizing knowledge on GBV is crucial for preventing violence in diverse communities, supporting survivors and allies, and promoting gender equity. The Knowledge Hub is also a project at the center, and it facilitates a trauma and violence-informed community of practice for projects conducting intervention programming and research for people who have experienced family violence. And this initiative is funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. The Knowledge Hub facilitates knowledge mobilization among 4 projects. Thanks. Okay. And I'd like to begin now with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that our work is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenapehoik, and the Chinungtung nations. These lands are connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. Today, this land continues to be home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. Today, we're going to learn about the experiences of Indigenous women and girls living in British Columbia who have gone missing or were found murdered along the Highway of Tears. And we're going to hear about the Calls for Justice program, which advocates for the safety of Indigenous women in alignment with the 33 Highway of Tears recommendations and the 231 calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women. Carrier Sekani Family Services continues to work to implement the recommendations and to assess progress regarding their implementation. On behalf of the Learning Network and Knowledge Hub teams, I would like to welcome you to our webinar today, Where We've Been, Where We're At, Where We're Going, the History of the Highway of Tears. And now I would like to welcome our speaker for today, Mary T.G. Gray. Mary is the Executive Director of Child and Family Services at Carrier Sekani Family Services, overseeing the provincially delegated programs and prevention programs and the Highway of Tears initiative, as well as violence prevention programs. Mary has an extensive resume, which you can read more about in her bio on our website, and the link will be available for you in the chat. Welcome, Mary. We are so looking forward to this presentation today.
Thank you for that gracious welcome, and I'm absolutely looking forward to this opportunity to speak to you today about a very, very important topic, close to my heart. Okay. So I'll just get right into it. So I'm, as I said, Mary T.G. Gray. I come from the Takla Nation, which is north central British Columbia. I am Giksun and Carrier. Giksun, of course, are the people of the River of Mist, and the Carrier Natoten coming from up in the Takla Lake region. Definitely 2 different people. Giksun and Carrier are totally different peoples. I'm matrilineal, so I go towards my mother. I'm Wolf Clan, which is Lachgibu, that's Giksun. My hereditary chief's name is Maush Gubu, which is White Wolf. And I come from the house in Nagyep. That's who I am. And what I do, as you've heard, I am the Chief Administrating Officer now of Child and Family and External Relations at Carrier Sekani Family Services. I also, though, there are other things that I do that really lend itself to this broader work that I do. I am on the National Advisory Committee for Child and Family Services Long-Term Reform. I represent British Columbia on that body. And of course, there's been the news about the 47.8 billion long-term reform compensation and all of that. That's what we've been doing all these years as the National Advisory Committee. I'm also a representative from British Columbia on the First Nations Caring Society since 2006. And that's led, of course, by the indomitable Cindy Blackstock. And I'm the president of the BC Aboriginal Child Care Society and the chair of all 24 Indigenous Child and Family Service Directors agencies in British Columbia, the Our Children Our Way Society. So those are some of the things I do. Definitely having that wide range of work, I've definitely seen over the years, like the how everything we're doing in those different fields, the social fields, are all interconnected. And that all of those fields of social work, services actually are lends itself to actually dealing with the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We are at Carrier Sekani, we provide services to 11 First Nations in North Central British Columbia. We're very unique in the country because we provide child and family, health, legal services, research services, all under one umbrella. Throughout Canada, there's predominantly, health services separate and then child and family services separate. Our agency, we do everything under one umbrella, which it is very conducive to the holistic work that we need to do. Okay, this where are we? The next slide, I think I talked about that. Next slide. Okay, I'll just speak to the next slide. Yeah, so this is me just again explaining some of the work I've done. I have been a part of the Minister's Advisory Council for Aboriginal Women for a few years until I think I got a bit too big mouth, as I tend to do, and was unceremoniously kicked off the team. The minister, who was Minister Rustad, John Rustad, who didn't really like me, actually asked that I wouldn't sit on the advisory council for women for BC. So yeah, I'm no longer on that. Anyways, the other thing too is I have been a part of years ago as a part of revamping and providing input into the revamping of the status of women Canada. So that was quite the intense work. So I will just get into the next slide, please. Our work is grounded in the memory of loved ones who have been lost along Highway 16, and we can't forget that. I always think about the quote from Margaret Mead, never believe that a few caring people can change the world, for indeed that's all that ever have. And really, when I do this work and when I speak about this very important matter, it comes from a place of just seeing the injustice. Since growing up in injustice, you grow you grow the discrimination, the racism. But I think it was really prevalent when I lost my first cousin, Ramona Wilson. And I think that's why I really got into the work more, very, very actively, because Ramona Wilson went missing, back in 1994. And when she went missing, there wasn't a big deal. Like there really wasn't, it wasn't all over the news. The RCMP wasn't doing a lot. And I remember that when that happened, my auntie, it is my auntie's daughter, had called my mother, and we all loved Ramona. We were very close to her. She was brilliant. She was smart. She was just sparkly. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was going to go to university. She's graduating. She had everything for her whole life in front of her. And so when she went missing, it was like it wasn't important, like as if it didn't matter. And it wasn't until about, I think it was the third or fourth day, that the RCMP finally took it seriously. It didn't matter that we were saying, no, she's not just a runaway. No, she's not just out partying. No, she's not out drugging. No, she didn't run down to the east side. I mean, this was all it was. It was like, okay, well, she was just doing this. And it almost seemed like if she was, in fact, living a high risk behavior, that her life didn't matter, as if that should play a role into that. Finally, we did get the RCMP and the city of Smithers and others to start searching and to start taking it seriously. I remember, myself going down on Vancouver East Side, putting up posters, even though we knew she wasn't down there, even though, we did this, we put up posters in Prince George, we did all of this stuff, even though we knew that she wouldn't have just ran down, she wouldn't have ran away, but if somebody had taken her, somebody would have seen her. So we did what we could as a family. Um, it really stayed with me because I just remember that the lack of regard given for this beautiful person's life. And so that sort of kept that always keeps me grounded, to never forget that. Ramona remains were found a year later and discarded under a tree by the airport in Smithers. And it is my Auntie Matilda Wilson and Brenda Wilson that has really been with me and with us, advocating for change, making sure that her memory was never forgotten. And I think I look to Matilda Wilson, my auntie, and she says all the time, I say, Auntie, she does speaking engagement. She volunteers her time. She's had a memorial walk ever since 1995 when for 30 years when we found Ramona's remains. The walk has gotten bigger. And I asked her one time, it was really sad. It was a really hard day for me. I remember because a lot of people could tell me their stories about their lost loved ones. And Auntie was very strong. And I said, Auntie, how can you do this like all the time? You do this walk every year, you're doing the work every year. And she said simply, I said, how you're so strong. And she simply said, I want to make sure that the hurt that I feel never ever happens to another mother. And I'm strong enough to do that. So that's the work that we do is of course grounded in the ones that we've lost. So I'll give you the Highway of Tears, some of the history of the Highway of Tears. So next slide. So the Highway of Tears, since it's probably around since 1969, there have been women and girls that have gone missing. In fact, sometimes when we talk to people, it has been earlier, a lot earlier, where it is quite common, where people say, oh no, she just never came home. We definitely found that when we started doing this work more proactively. The way that we ended up, starting the work and getting support for the work was a young girl that had gone missing, and this sort of started the Highway of Tears. There's a stretch of highway between Prince George and you go all the way to Prince Rupert, and that's a 724-kilometer stretch of highway. There are trucks back and forth. We used to have a Greyhound back and forth. It's a transportation thoroughway in the north, as most northern places throughout the rest of the country. I think that all of the ones that went missing, we can't just say that there were statistics, and we often remind people like, what if this was your daughter? What if this was your cousin, your niece, your mother in some cases? And so I think when we started looking at the numbers and seeing the prevalence of it, when we started doing the research, I've always have to remind people, especially like, when we're trying to get action, to say this is not just a statistic, and we're not going to just measure how well we're doing by the statistics. Like it's only two girls that went missing. Every life matters, and I think that's one of the things that we always have to be very clear on. I think the other pointer on the Highway of Tears is that there are still girls that are going missing. There are still violence against women that hasn't changed. So the way that the Highway of Tears initiative, next slide, the way that the Highway of Tears initiative occurred is in March, in the spring of, actually, no, so it would have been January, February. A young girl, Ayla Auger, went missing. She was this is the Highway of Tears Symposium. She went missing. Ayla Auger went missing, and there really wasn't much done. Like it didn't seem like there was a lot done. And what ended up happening is there was a lady that was the Global News was up, and that Global News, of course, is in British Columbia and Vancouver. And there was Ted Chernicki was actually wanting to do a story on it, which was unheard of. And a lady was walking by that knew me, and Ted said, "Well, it's nobody really wants us to talk about this. This young girl goes missing again." And of course, at the time, the leadership were men. And they said, well, it's something that we shouldn't be talking about. So then that's how they directed Ted Chernicki to me. And I remember asking, he's asking about these questions, and we were all upset. This is like yet another girl going missing. Um, Again and again, just the injustice. And I remember telling Ted, and I said, well, Ted, like maybe like I said, consider this. What if you had 65 young girls, young white girls going missing out of West Vancouver? Do you think that we would even be here? That there would be all kinds of RCMP, all kinds of investigation, there'd be something that would have done, something that would have been, somebody would have done something. And I think that was a soundbite that went across the country, which then ended up going across the world. That, there was all these missing Indigenous women in Canada and nothing was being done. And so with that, there was a counselor on lately today, uh, and everybody was upset. And so what happened is that we then said, well, let's get a symposium together. And we gathered that symposium in such a short time. And I'm telling these stories really so that you can see how there are some committed individuals and how the impetus for getting the Highway of Tears symposium was really, we had it, when Ayla Auger, 15 years old, went missing and then eventually was found murdered. That was it for us. We said, we have to do something. So we put pressure on the government. We challenged all the other First Nations leadership and other organizations to come together to start the symposium. We had no funding to have the symposium. So we started like with $10,000, challenging everybody, every nation. And then at the end of it, we had over 1,000 people, 1,200 people, including almost every level of provincial government. And if the ministers weren't there, the deputy ministers were there. We had the Solicitor General there. And what we did is that my auntie who does the walk, she actually walked from Smithers all the way into Prince George to the Civic Center. And when she got out, so she was just outside of Prince George, just beside the Civic Center, we all gathered with her and walked with her into the symposium. You can imagine how impactful that was. And then, finally, that there was coming to light, like all of these issues that she had been advocating since, 1995 to get to bring it to this level. So that symposium, what we did is we asked, I chaired that symposium, and we simply asked questions because we had the families of the victims come forward, and by this point, we had already identified the families of the victims. And what I asked were very simple questions. One of the big ones was, what could have been done for your family at the time of your lost loved ones? What could the RCMP have done? What could have media have done? Like it was just a simple question like that. What could have been better for you at that time? And so you have to remember, Ayla had been missing. There had been over 65 women that had gone, First Nations women that had gone missing. But what happened in this whole miss was that Nicole Hoare had gone missing, and she was a tree planter. She had gone missing a few years before Ayla. And I remember when Nicole Hoare went missing, I could not believe how quickly media responded. I remember watching the news and I said, oh my God, she just went missing. She's been not even missing for a full day. And there was posters everywhere. And it was constantly on the news. And there was so much support. And but yet we had, how many First Nations women going missing, and there was really nothing. We had to pull the RCMP. So right away there was within a day there was an award for her for any information. There was search parties all over the place. They were organizing search parties for her along the highway. It was amazing. And it was a good thing. It was a good thing. But getting back to the symposium, and Nicole Hoare was a non-Indigenous girl. So when we got to the symposium and we're asking these questions, so the families of the victims were saying, when my daughter went missing, the RCMP didn't start searching for a week. When my daughter went missing, the media didn't even come to ask questions. I had to do all the media myself, like all of this stuff. So all of these stories were coming up about how there was nothing done for days after their loved one went missing, or how they were not believed, or how, again, they were stigmatized. Oh, she was a drug dealer, or not a drug dealer, she did drugs, or she probably was partying, like the same thing that we'd heard. So just wait for her, or she'll come back, or there was like no seriousness given to that. So on this time, so when Nicole Hoare went missing, what I did is, as I said at the symposium, I asked the question, what could have been done better? And what was the most impactful, I'll tell you this, is Jack Hoare, who's become a close friend of mine and close friend of ours. Jack went up there and he said, when Nicole went missing, he said, within hours, I had victim support at my house. I had the RCMP at my house. Within another few hours, I had the lead investigators. Within another few hours, we had searchers, dog teams searching the area. We had, we had all the kinds of media within the day. By the next day, we had helicopters. And, on the second day, we had a financial reward. Everything was done quickly. And he said, and that's abhorrent. Jack Hoare said that was abhorrent. He said, I'm listening to the stories, and he says, the only reason that everybody moved so fast is because she was a white girl. And he said, and that the way that my daughter was treated, that's how all First Nations girls should have been treated. And so Jack became a very strong advocate for us, and he's done a lot of work with us, and he's provided a lot of advice. And I think that was really the Highway of Tears 16, the Highway of Tears Symposium, bringing everything to light. At the same time, with the Highway 16, those recommendations came from, we asked stakeholders. So we had every level of service there. We had frontline workers, community members. We had, the Solicitor General's office, which was very important, the RCMP, everybody coming together. And so we categorized the recommendations. There's 33 recommendations into victim prevention, emergency planning and team readiness, victim family counseling and support, community development and support strategies. What we also did at the time is really started getting like lobbying across the country, not just in British Columbia. I went to the National Aboriginal Women Summit, the NAS, spoke in Ottawa. I did like media across the world because of the severity of everything, and because it seemed like nothing was getting done. We also then at the same time, when this was all going on, there was a wonderful director, a young man, Matt Smiley, who was actually had decided to make a film on the Highway of Tears. The film of the Highway of Tears came about because Matt's sister. He's from LA. Matt's from Los Angeles. His sister lives in Prince George, and he came up camping, and then he started hearing the stories from the tree planters because of course Nicole Hoare, everything that was happening. So Matt came back up and decided that he was going to do this film. So then he worked with Nathan Fillion, Carly Pope, a few other producers, and then got a hold of my brother, who was the tribal council, and got a hold of me. And so I was executive producer on the film. But the story of the Highway of Tears, Matt is, of course, he's not Indigenous, but it was really important, again, that he saw the story, not from the way that we saw it, but he saw the story in a way that the world needed to know. And so the Highway of Tears documentary was released at TIFF that year, and we won. We then released it across the world and then across the country. And we actually lobbied so that the members of parliament had to see it. So we showed it in British Columbia, in the legislature, and then also within the federal government, like all the MPs and also in the province, the MLAs had to watch the Highway of Tears documentary. So I think that was really impactful. So that was sort of happening. At the same time, when this was going on, we were lobbying for Canada to allow the UN Special Rapporteur to come into Canada, to look at the plight of First Nations women, to look at the horrible numbers. And of course, through the Harper government, they weren't allowing them in. The special rapporteur at the time was Dr. James Anaya, and I know Dr. James Anaya from other work that I've done when it came to land claims and treaty negotiations, whatnot. And so I was able to reach out to James and I said, James, like, what is the best way that we can get you here? Like, what is the pressure that we can put on? And so he was really good. Like, he was very good in providing some guidance to say how we did this work. And so finally, the special rapporteur, after 3 years of lobbying, came into Canada. That's not to say that we didn't have other entities. Amnesty International came into Canada. They came up to Northern BC. The Human Rights Watch, they did a research report as well. And so we were really getting that momentum to get the messaging out. And so one of the things that we actually did at the same time is that we did a change.org online, and we had requested that there would be a national inquiry or national an inquest into missing murdered women. And we actually, the first few days, we got over 70,000 signatures. And of those signatures, Justin Trudeau signed on, Margaret Atwood signed on, Elizabeth May, Thomas Mulcair. So these real key political figures signed on to the change.org to have a national inquiry into missing murdered women. So finally, in 2016, the national inquiry came about. But you have to remember, it wasn't just the national inquiry that was happening. So we had the symposium, and then we had the national inquiry, which is the next slide. We had there was also the Forsaken report that was done in British Columbia. And if you recall, way back then, all the women that were going missing on the downtown east side. There were the ones that all got killed on the Picton pig farm. So there was going to be an inquiry into that. I remember, Wally Opal, Honorable Wally Opal was the one to lead that. And even though we had been asking for something to be done in the north, inquiry along the Highway 16, the Highway of Tears, nothing was done. And so they said, okay, well, we're going to do this just in Vancouver. And so I started lobbying, and I met with Wally, and I said, Wally, you can't just do this section, Vancouver. And forget about that. We've been asking, been lobbying for 10 years to have something, the inquiry into the north. And so finally, Wally did decide, agreed that the commissioners that were looking at the missing women in the Vancouver downtown east side, that they would come up north. The reasoning and the rationale that I gave them is, I said, I swear to God, like, many of those women will come from the north. And in fact, sure enough, I had two cousins, one first cousin and a more distant cousin. Their remains were found on the Picton pig farm. So when many of our young women, as everywhere in the country, they would go down to the Vancouver east side and live that vulnerable lifestyle. So what in the Forsaken report, so now we have the Highway of Tears recommendations report, we had the Forsaken report, we have the Stolen Sisters report, we had many reports about and many recommendations, but really nothing was getting done as we wanted. In fact, in the Forsaken report about the missing women that perished on the pig farm, the number one recommendation is actually that the Highway of Tears recommendations be fully implemented. So just to keep that in mind. Finally, we did have the national inquiry in 2016. The national inquiry, as a Highway of Tears, because we already had started what we did in the Highway of 16 recommendations report. We had started a governing body. And the governing body was comprised of levels of government, stakeholders, and some families of the victims. And that governing body, as per the recommendations report, was to fully realize those recommendations, those 33 recommendations, and provide advice to government as to how to proceed to implement these recommendations, and to actually have a report card on these recommendations. So that happened already. We then developed a toolkit, the Highway 16 toolkit, which taught communities and schools. We actually went into the schools about safety and teaching them about the issue. So we did have a toolkit. We then further developed the toolkit to have a train the trainers toolkit. And that was really successful across northern British Columbia. So successful that we were asked to present all over the place, all over Canada. We were presenting in Vancouver. We didn't have a lot of money to do this work, but whenever we could, we did present. Not a lot of staff to do this work, but we that toolkit really started formalizing more active awareness and safety campaigns, not only for First Nations community, but just across the board. So when the national inquiry came up, we already had quite a lot of experience in talking to the families of the victims and getting information in a good way with ceremony and respect. And so we were asked to actually help with the first pre-inquiry session that they had in Vancouver. And so we helped them organize that. And then we actually had the first national inquiry during that kickoff in Prince George here. And so the national inquiry, of course, I'm glad that it happened, but it was not my first recommendation. I had thought, because we had so many reports, that we would actually just take all those reports, do a literature review, find out the key elements, the key recommendations, and actually develop a work plan, an action plan to start implementing all those recommendations from all the previous reports and the previous meetings. That didn't happen, unfortunately. We ended up having a full-blown national inquiry. I thought we would have been better served by just having key focus groups of providing advice as to how to implement this action plan. So at the end of the day, the national inquiry lent itself to, of course, the 231 calls for justice. So that's the next slide, the calls for justice. And I think the calls for justice was a good thing. I think it was very cathartic for many of the families of the victims, the individuals of the victims that didn't get their chance to really speak their truth. I think it was cathartic in that way. It gave weight to their words. It made them be seen and heard and felt. So it was good in that way. I truly believe, though, that then this is just my own opinion, that there was I think we could have done it a better way, where there would actually be more action on the ground rather than saying, okay, these are the recommendations which were already there. Most of the recommendations were already there. This is how we implement it. So what ended up happening is, once the 231 calls for justice came out, of course, within that year, really nothing had happened. Nothing had changed. And one of the things, as an advocate, we had always said we don't want it just to gather dust. Something needs to happen. And so the minister at the time, Minister Bennett, had called me over. I flew into Ottawa and gave them recommendations as to how they could implement this. And I said, why don't you look at what we did in Northern British Columbia, and you start implementing the calls for justice in the same way throughout the rest of the country, which made sense to them. So we ended up, I worked with them, and they developed a secretariat. And then, as all good government does, then we don't know what happened. And then there's like no accountability. They sort of just went off on their own. They took some of the recommendations as how to do the work. But one good thing they did do is that we received some funding from them to start the 231 calls to implement that here in British Columbia. And so we received some funding, and what we're doing is that we are, re-engaging with the Highway of Tears, along the Highway of Tears, but we're also looking at how do we implement those 231 calls for justice. If you recall earlier, I said I am the chair of the Indigenous Child and Family Services Directors Forum. Now, in the 231 calls for justice, there is a section on child welfare. And that was something to me that was really important, that we had to look at that, because certainly when we were doing the early work and knowing families of the victims, what I saw anecdotally, was that there was always a link to child and family, whether or not the young person that went missing was in care herself, or the parents or their parents were in care. There was some link to that. And so I was really pleased when they really took that concentration on child welfare. So after the 231 calls came about in child welfare, what I was able to do as chair is to actually establish a working group from all of the agencies and working with the Ministry of Children and Families to say there's these calls to action or calls to justice. What are we doing now, and what do we need to do to implement these calls to justice? And so that work we undertook with many consultation. We do have that report on our Children Our Way site, so it is there, but it doesn't mean that work isn't done. We're still doing that work to ensure those recommendations. So I think that was a good exemplar of how we are still on a provincial level, more in the child and family, how we are implementing those recommendations. We're also, I think what's important, we also started working on a national scope, so giving some recommendations as to how you could implement the Highway of Tears initiative across the country. And definitely, I do believe that's what we need to do to ensure that we get to where we're at. The next slide, please. So the some of the partnerships, I think, when we had the calls for justice, one of the things that's really important, and I can't stress this enough, is the importance of relationships. The relationships and the partnerships are integral to moving this work forward, or any work that needs to happen to change the world. You need to have those partnerships. It's funny because I was thinking about it this morning, and I thought about all the things that all the fights I've had, and I'm kind of vocal and kind of mouthy in some cases, but I realized that later I was like young and feisty, but later in life I started, okay, well, it's important for relationships, because if you think about it from a personal level, if you like somebody, if you're getting along with somebody, you're going to be more keen to wanting to help them. That's just basic human nature. And so we started developing these good relationships with RCMP, good relationships with government, and really started identifying and being key as to what a good, effective partnership looks like. And so what we did is we had, as I said, the Highway of Tears governing body that included those key government officials and RCMP, and broader now the calls for justice. We do have an advisory council within our agency, and that's comprised of all the First Nations women's leadership, some of the staff that come together so that we are building the internal capacity to fully implement the 231 calls for justice. That doesn't mean that we have forgotten about sort of the national still that move to the national, assisting the national rollout of those recommendations. Some of the provinces have good programs. Some of the provinces have very limited programs. I definitely know that in the northern parts of Canada, there's very, very few programs. Having traveled across the country the last few years, I've definitely seen that. So I think developing a national toolkit is what we're working on, developing a national toolkit, updating the toolkit for those safety awareness, and hopefully that'll be rolled out in the next couple of years. Some of the next slide, we talked about partnerships. The next slide, please. So this is where I'm going to talk about a little bit about projects that we have right now. We have the Highway of Tears documentary, as I talked a little bit about that already. That's the next slide. Next slide. Okay, so I talked about that, and so that this actually, you can find this now. We do have it in the last I don't think the last 6 months. We've now it's on YouTube, so you could watch that. It's quite a good documentary. The next slide, please. So this one is sort of my own project, but this one is on Netflix. And again, it's Matt Smiley directing this film For Love. It came out a couple of years ago, and it tells the story of children that are in care, but it really talks about the impacts of residential school, all of these things. We do touch a bit on missing murder women. And so I wrote and produced and helped direct this film. And Matt Smiley, again, is the director for this film. Shania Twain is the narrator for this film. So again, I think though there's some projects that we worked on. The next slide. So some of the other action, I'm just going to give you a bit of some of the other things that we're doing. So the Hope and Strength vignettes. And of course, some of you have seen this. Now, this came again about when I talk about relationships, it's so important. So I had submitted a proposal to Wage and Gender Equity Canada to provide some services along the highway of tears, some safety awareness campaigns, things like that. We always have at Carrier Sekani Family Services, even though we don't get funded to do this, we've always had, we've been the host agency for the Highway of Tears all these years, just because the work was so important. Now, what happened is we were, moving along with doing the work, getting, we had a coordinator helping with the awareness things. And so what happened is I worked really well with a young lady at Wage, and she had said, well, Mary, there's some funding that nobody has asked for. Like there's some funding there. We've reached out to it. And what it is funding to end the negative stereotypes of Indigenous women and girls. Is there a project? Is there anything that you think that how we could do this? And right away, of course, I said, of course I do. And so that's when I said, I think what we need to do is that let's not just look at the statistics, because we have to look at the women out there. So I wanted these vignettes to show that not only for our girls, but for society, for Canadian citizens to know that we're not just a number, we're not just a stat, that in fact, that, we're strong, and that, we have, so much more than just being statistics that you see on TV. And so that's how the Hope and Strength vignettes came about. And the Hope and Strength vignettes came about, the name, because again, I didn't just want it to be like calls for justice or highway tours, because there is that negative connotation. I want it to be more that, that we have control, that we were self-determining, that we are strength, and that we are hope. And then that's how the name came about that. So those are the vignettes, and I'm sure you've seen some of those. And so what we did is we actually looked across the country, and identifying ones that wanted their stories told. And then we asked across the country for Indigenous filmmakers to actually do the little vignettes, and then we brought them together. And again, of course, I had to work with Matt Smiley and Cassidy Chivera, who was amazing at getting everything together. The Hope and Strength vignettes, there's 8 of them. Next slide. And so we have a wonderful communications department at CSFS who assisted us with the campaign, which we launched in 2024 on Facebook, YouTube, and X. We were still doing a lot of this work. We do have Julie Dom is the one that is now overseeing the missing murdered women and the Calls for Justice program at CSFS. It's left in good hands. We do work together still, but there's a lot of great things that we're also going to be doing. We had a Tracy Leost who came and did a speaking engagement. She's one of the ones that is identified on the Hope and Strength vignettes. So she came to do a speaking engagement in one of our little communities. I think right now we also have like schools that are asking for it, different levels of government that ask for some of these vignettes. So it's a really strong vehicle, again, wanting to ensure that people understand when we talk about this serious issue, that is not just numbers and stats, that these are actually human beings, these are actually family, and these are strong women. So I think I think that's one of the things that we really wanted to make sure that people saw. The next slide, please. Awareness through awareness through signage. In recommendation number 9, we have out of the Highway of Tears recommendations, the 33 recommendations. And again, I want to reference what I talked about earlier, a few committed individuals being able to make change. When the recommendations report came out, I'll give you what it was back then. There was no signage. We didn't have cell service. Media didn't seem to be friendly. We still have the truck drivers. We still have young people hitchhiking. And just like all the rest of the country in the north, those transportation corridors are very dangerous. We know that. But people still need to access services. Young people still need to go to school. We still have people needing to go to appointments and going into those central places. So you still have hitchhiking all across the country. We know that. And so one of the things that we really wanted to do with the Highway of Tears when we were looking at the recommendations, the number one recommendation that we had was to establish a transportation route and to have more bus services in the north. That was the number one recommendation. Keep in mind, this was in 2006. That recommendation never saw the light of day for the longest time. Like, even though we had the recommendations and we were lobbying government, we continued to do the work off the side of our desk. What happened about 10 years later, in about 2015, 2014, 2015, we actually got a call I got a call to meet the Minister of Transportation. And so I flew down to Victoria. And they said, hey, listen, because we had tried working with them years before that, and they're like, oh, this is a good idea. We'll give you some signs, or like just little tiny bulletins, or we'll give you some space on here, but they never had anything concrete. And so I met with them. I already had another meeting in Victoria. And I remember sitting there, and the deputy minister was there and said, oh, Mary, we want to work together. With the Highway of Tears, because there was some more missing girls at the time. And I said, okay, so what do you have planned? And they said, well, we think if we have an action plan or a rep, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, how much money is on the table? Well, we think we could do this sort of like in kind and whatever. So I just said, I'm done. So I started getting my stuff together, my briefcase, got everything together, and I was almost out the door. And they said, oh, no. I said, I'm not wasting any more time. There's nothing here. You're not saying anything new. You want us to partner with you so you could look good, but you have nothing to give. And so at the end of the day, they said, well, we do have some money. And I said, well, how much? And they said 5 million or something. I think it was 5 million. And I said, well, what's that going to do? It's going to do nothing in the north. And so finally they said, actually, we do have access to some more money. And so it was about 10 million or something that they had said. And I said, well, that'll be worth my time. So I sat down. And from there, we worked to say, okay, let's consult in the north. How do we do this? So we actually consulted, we worked with the Ministry of Transportation and consulted the municipalities and First Nations communities along the Highway 16 for their transportation needs. From that, the Highway 16 transportation action plan was born. And out of that, there came more and more money. And we actually got the federal government to contribute, which was unheard of. And so that plan, which is still used today. There was a BC Transit expansion. Remember when I said back in the day there was no transportation? So there's $5 buses through the BC Transit. And I say this because the rest of the country, the rest of the country could easily implement this. It's an exemplar for the rest of the country. So we have $5 buses. We have a community transportation grant program. And so what we found is that in some communities, not just First Nations communities, smaller little communities, that they did not necessarily have their own little bus. So, for example, I'll use the example, Fort St. James, they applied for a community grant, and they have a bus that takes elders from Fort St. James into Vanderhoof, which is a little bit bigger of a town, for their appointments, for their shopping sometimes. They do that like twice a week. And then they also take the that bus also goes to Prince George for the bigger appointments. So we have that. So that community grant transportation program was able to do that for many small municipalities, which is a really good thing because, as you know, Greyhound pulled out of Canada, especially those northern remote communities. Greyhound pulled out. So that was another transportation system that we lost out on. We also have the one of the things that we did, we piloted, Carrier Sekani piloted this First Nations drivers education, because what I found when I was working in my field in social and with the social issues is that we couldn't get enough workers and everything. So I started, why can't we get these workers? Well, a lot of them didn't have their driver's license, lost their driver's license, something happened. So we started the First Nations drivers education program, and that program met them where they were at. So we would come into communities and then we would do the basic, drivers testing, and we would get them prepared. We had people that helped them study for the driver's test. And then the drivers, we actually brought them in the community so that they could do the testing in a safe place where they felt comfortable. And then we had very, very high success rates. So that program was now formalized in Northern British Columbia. And we also now have webcams. We have the bus shelters and pullouts and everything. So when you drive along Highway 16, you'll see these beautiful bus shelters. There's webcams all along the way. And it's really that. And the fifth thing was the collaboration that we have, First Nations, Ministry of Transportation, and government. So that's a really good example of working together, which I think Canada and the rest of the world could actually look at that. The other thing that we did through the Highway Tiers recommendations report, which is really important, is that recommendation number 8 was cell coverage. Well, not necessarily cell coverage. In 2006, the recommendation was that there would be phone booths along the highway, so that that if somebody was like hitchhiking or needed help or something, that there would be phone booths. This is how long ago. But what ended up happening a few years ago is I got a call from the CEO of Rogers and said, "Mary, you need to be here. I'd like to meet you. We're thinking of embarking on an initiative." So I met the CEO and I met the chair of Rogers. And I had no idea what to expect, but they were full on. They said, "Mary, we're gonna do this. We're going to have cell towers in all of northern BC." Don't forget, we had been advocating, with Ask TELUS. We tried to do everything we could to have that transportation, especially the cell coverage. And so just recently, so now we have 8 cell towers in northern British Columbia. There's still a few more cell towers. So the whole highway, along the highway into Haida territory, the Haida on the island, they will have cell coverage, which is amazing. And again, that's an exemplar. But what is really cool about this cell project is that where the cell towers go, and it's really rough terrain in some parts of northern British Columbia, the big, beautiful mountains. And so they've actually develop new technology that's never been created before to actually be able to get these cell towers functioning. They also are using, there's like 4 big, what are they? These big helicopter things. There's only about 4 or 5 in Western North America. And so they've actually are able to use these things, and then they put these cell towers, these collapsible cell towers, and then bring them up. It's amazing what they do, but they've created all this technology. And so what ended up happening is their few $1 million project has escalated. Like it's crazy. And the rest of the world is actually looking to Rogers for this technology that they're using. Anyways, so that's kind of exciting. So we have that now in northern British Columbia. It's almost completed. The other thing that they did, what Rogers did, and again, I use them for that importance of partnerships, what I talked about earlier. My aunt said, "Wouldn't it be great if we had a red dress on these towers?" And so that it sounds easy, like, yeah, well, let's put a red dress up there. But what they have to do, and these red dresses are massive, because what they wanted, Auntie said, is so no matter where you see it from the highway or from wherever you're at, you can see the red dress. So they actually had to do that. And these things are huge and they're heavy. So they had to it added, I know, a lot more cost, but they did that. And so I think looking at Rogers, their partnership is really putting reconciliation into action, which is one of the 231 calls for justice, is that, businesses and entities really lend them their finances and their support to these projects. So that was a really good example. The awareness through signage, recommendation number 9 is that we had more signage along the way. And so I'm really excited about this because we'd worked again with the Ministry of Transportation, and we were trying to change the name because it's a highway of tears. It's quite a negative piece. And the families were saying, well, we don't want just our kids, our loved ones to be seen in that way. We want to give the youth some hope. And so thinking about that, what we said, well, what if we named it the Highway of Hope? And so the Ministry of Transportation agreed to it. And so instead of being called the Yellowhead Highway, which again is very, very negative connotation, we were close to getting them to change the highway to the Highway of Hope. It would have been, I think, the second time in Canada where a highway would have been changed the name. So you have the 401 in Toronto, which is called the Highway of Heroes. We would have called this a Highway of Hope. We're still working on that. I'm hoping to get there eventually. But the signage, again, working with the families of the victims, the Highway of Tears governing body, we came up with the hope and wellness. So the next slide. So, so again, going back to the hope and strength vignettes, we are hope and we are strength. And so Notley, if you look at that, that's a First Nations community. Notley is hope, Notley is strength. Keep Highway 16 safe. And so that's all along the highways. I know throughout the rest of the country, we have been getting requests. And so it was, we're getting funded for some of the signage, not a lot of funding. We've got to still lobby for more funding. But so what we've asked our First Nations communities along the highway is if they could put up signs. So we have Notley is hope, Notley is strength, and that's of course a First Nations community. And then if you look at this, there's a Carrier Sekani Family Services. But if you look at the logo, the Highway of Tears logo, with the red, the woman, and it could be a woman or a man with the feathers. That's going to be our national, that's our national initiative. And that national initiative is called Our Spirit. And so we're still working on getting that across the country. Next slide. So this is our Spirit website and toolkit. We're still working on that. We do have, I think, almost the toolkit has to be translated into French. And what we really want to do is a network of supports, much like we did in the Highway of Tears here in the north. The toolkit itself, in the toolkit, it's where you can go for support, where you could get help. And it gives you all the up-to-date resources, say like a safe house. And that's what we want to do throughout the country. And we would work with, they're called the Family Liaison Units, the FILU, that is funded by the federal government through their Secretariat for Missing Murdered Women. So the FILU are in each province. And so my thought was that we would have them work with us to update those national awareness toolkits, safety toolkits across the country. And that's sort of why we called the whole initiative Our Spirit, because no matter where you're at in the country as Indigenous people, the spirit, like that's where it's strong. You keep that strong and you keep it protected. And so the logo, you'll see where it's got the hair and the feathers. The feathers for us as First Nations people is always like we use it in ceremony, and it's got different meanings across the country for Indigenous group. But at the end of the day, the sanctity and the importance and of feathers, of different feather ceremonies all lend itself to justice. And so that's why the feathers are there. So we're still working on that toolkit. The next slide. I really want to talk about the importance of research. We've done different analysis across the years. We've partnered with UNBC, but for certain, really, I think in this work, people will sometimes forget about academia. But a lot of good work has been done through different research with universities to get things going and to get awareness, more awareness. So what we've done now, again, we've like as I said, we've partnered with UNBC. We've done an environmental scan of intervention programs across North America. And again, all of this stuff will lend itself to the actual toolkit so that have a toolkit, you're providing safety programs in your community, you're doing a presentation, you'll actually be able to have this toolkit that's online, hard copies as well, to say these are the places that you could go for safety. This is what you need to do if somebody goes missing. This is who you contact. So that's what we're doing right now. Um, Next slide. So we do have the 2026 Highway of Tears Symposium coming up. You guys will all be invited if you'd like to come. We'll let you know when that is. We do have dates. So one of the key recommendations back in 2006, the original Highway of Tears recommendations was that there would be another symposium. Because we haven't been funded, we weren't able to get the funding. We ask every year. And so finally, the last couple of years, we did get Cassidy Chavera, who was our amazing coordinator. We worked together to get the proposal out and we were successful. So we are having the Highway of Tears Symposium in 2026. And what we're going to look at that symposium is, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. What have we achieved? It's really exciting to do this work when we actually see this come to fruition. One of the things that I also should share with you, which is exciting, is that we actually we also have embarked on the Pillar Project. We're calling it the Pillar Project. One of the things that I know as First Nations people, like for me, my people, whenever someone dies, we have a lot of ceremony, and then we have a big feast a year after our loved one dies. So for me and my clan, I'm Wolf Clan. If somebody dies in my family or from the clan, all the rest of the three other clans help us at our time of grief. And then a year later, what we do is that we pay back those clans in a feast, and it's called like the letting go feast or letting go. But it's a beautiful ceremony because it also allows the loved ones time to grieve. So you go through the first seasons without them, the first Christmas without your loved one, the first spring. You go through all of that in that year. And then that year of letting go, you have the big feast and you're able to dance and you do it in a good way. You pay everybody back and you do it in a good way. And it's really celebrating their life. But imagine if you've never found your loved one. And it always stayed with me, like how heartbreaking. You've never been able to lay them to rest in a good way. So I started thinking, for us, we have totem poles, we have things, we have our clan symbols and everything. But some of the women that went missing along the highway are not necessarily from Northwest Coast clans or tribes. So what we're doing is we're having a pillar that's going to be erected in Prince George at the start of the highway or beginning of the highway or end of the highway from where you're coming, and one in Prince Rupert. One of the pillars is called the Pillar of Hope, and the other pillar is called the Pillar of Strength. And these pillars will show the four seasons. They'll be carved with the four seasons. We'll have the sand will have a water. The water will be there, but there will also be salmon along the four seasons. And that's because my mom always says we're all like salmon. We all come home to die. So reflecting that. And then we're also going to have some Métis flowers because some of the women that went missing were Métis in this pillar. So that's going to be, we're working on that. So hopefully by the symposium 2026, we'll have those two pillars. We've already secured the land in Prince George and in Prince Rupert. We've already we're just finalizing the design. I know they're getting my scratch design made into something better than my little scratch design. So that'll be done in 2026, we're hoping. So that's another project I wanted to share with you. So the next slide, what can you do? I think there's the eight general calls. How can you respond? How can you look at that? And I think, as I said, oftentimes people are like, well, what can I do? Well, there's a lot you can do as an individual, just as an individual, is to let people know that this is still going on. And to really get that to not be part of the problem, and some of the stigmatization. It's heartbreaking. I was just in Manitoba last week. I've been there quite a few times in Winnipeg, but when we've had to push to search the landfills. I mean, it's just like when we had to drag the Red River to look for bodies, and to look at landfills for bodies. I think we need to let Canadian citizens say, think about the enormity of this in this first world country, that we're actually having to do this. Like, we're supposed to be such progressive, just country, yet we're finding dead bodies just thrown in the garbage. I think, we have to take some personal responsibility to say, like, how did our society come to this place where lives of Indigenous girls matter nothing, that they're just thrown away and discarded, whether or not it be in a river or in a dump. It breaks my heart, but I think it's really just that calling for your MLAs and your MPs to do something and to take it seriously. We cannot ever stop talking about this. As long as there's one Indigenous women going missing and becoming murdered, as long as that keeps happening, and as long as that's the norm and not changing, we have to keep working. And I think this is really important. So that volunteering, fundraising, doing all the work that we need to do. And again, the partnerships and those relationships make us stronger together. And I know, just just for me, the commitment I've seen from individuals and partners, it's astounded me, and it's made me, just when I think, my heart's heavy, something beautiful will happen, and somebody will come up and say, like Rogers, for example, hey, we're going to do this, that it gives you more faith and hope in humanity. And I think that's where we're at. Like, we really have to think about this as it's not just their problem. It's not, it's a First Nations problem. It's a Canadian problem. It's not just a woman's problem. It's a man's problem. And, we have to really look at it through that. So the next slide. So, of course, these are some of the important dates that we always have. The Women's Memorial March, which is getting bigger and bigger. There's a massive one in Vancouver. We celebrate that. May 5th, the National Day of Awareness. National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Women is October 4th. And of course, we have International Women's Day as well. These are all really important dates, because again, that's where, your own commitment, showing up and just being there. I think just being there and lending your spirit to the families. I know, every time I go to these things, and my auntie's there and our family's there, and having lost so many in my community, that, just to look at people being there lifts our souls, lifts our hearts. So just even being there is something that you can do. I just really want to thank you for this opportunity. I know I kind of went over time. I'm sorry, but I hope I was able to shed some light. I know I could speak about this forever and to tell you even more of the stuff that we're doing, but we condensed this, and I just really appreciate all of you for taking the time to listen and to learn and to share your heart and your spirit with me. Masai, thank you.
And thank you, Mary, for that amazing and very powerful presentation. You managed to pack a lot of information in there. And first of all, I really want to thank you for sharing the story of the loss of your cousin Ramona. And I'm so sorry. And I can understand why this is such a personal thing for you. It certainly you've shared a lot of personal losses through all of this. It was also so humbling to hear about the basic infrastructure pieces that you've been able to put in place through this work, such as the Rogers cell service and signage, right? Some of the things that we certainly take for granted here in the South, and then particularly in Ontario. And I think putting in piece the part of the pillars of hope and strength is particularly inspiring, and I'm sure that there are many of us that would love to see them when they're ready. So
Yeah.
Um, would love to see that when they're done. We've had a ton of questions come through as you've been speaking, and so we'll get to as many as we can. But one of them, I'm going to preface before we get to to the question. But recently on the CBC, I heard a story, and it was so interesting to me about a community in northern Saskatchewan who had had the first birth in their community because they finally had midwives that were within the community so that they could have a birth. It was the first time in 50 years. Otherwise, the women were always sent down to the south to have their children. And so, one of the questions that came in through this is that is there any data showing any the increased risk of harm of going missing or being murdered when Indigenous birthers or pregnant people are medically evacuated from their communities to urban centers?
Not particularly in those situations, but for sure the vulnerabilities when young women or when women have to go leave their home community to go to the urban setting to for whatever it is, appointment, birthing or whatever. I'm really happy to hear about that program. When I was making the film For Love, um, we have a lot of ingenuity, and I call it Indianuity because we've always had to look at do more with less and all this stuff. But this whole concept of birthing, which is it's funny that I just had a big talk yesterday on this. We're we're building a birthing center here in Prince George, because what happens throughout the rest of the country, Canada, is that women are coming into the urban setting, and they're not necessarily being seen by doctors throughout their pregnancy because of different reasons. But when they come to the community, this urban setting, they're usually staying in a motel or a hotel or a place. But what we're doing is we're building a really beautiful wraparound, safe, comfortable place for them and their families to stay. So that's speaking about that. We also have the maternal child health program. Now, the way that you link, for me, one of the things that Carrier Sekani, we have a life cycle approach to our services. The premise is that if you have a healthy baby, you have a healthy child, healthy adult, healthy parent. And that's important because when you look at the issue of missing and murdered women and you look at the vulnerabilities, it's that very reason that because of the impacts of residential school, those vulnerabilities. So my mom would say, our role as adults is you need to grow a whole person. My mom's third language is English. She's learned English when she was 11. So she'd say, you have to grow a whole person. That's what you're trying to do. A whole person that could protect themselves, be safe, and all of this stuff. Be a good person, a good whole person. So that when you're thinking about this birthing, when you're having a beautiful birth, you do have that connection to baby. You do. It is keeping you're dealing with the impacts of residential school. You are making yourself, the mother, the baby stronger by just that simple act of that birthing in a safe, comfortable spot. And then, when you don't have to leave your community, and you're going through all of those vulnerable times, you'll have that support from your community. I love it when I hear these stories of how nations are taken back their right to give birth in their traditional way. You look at northern Manitoba and Attawapiskat, they have a beautiful midwifery program. We're developing our own midwifery program. We have a doula program. I love that when I hear of these wonderful these new things. I may have to go to northern Saskatchewan and see this.
Awesome. So another question that's come in is how can we shine a light on who the perpetrators are? The person is saying, in my experience, many non-Indigenous Canadians think that murdered and missing Indigenous women are taken mostly by Indigenous men, not realizing or wanting to accept that non-Indigenous, no, sorry, that non-Indigenous men are part of the problem. And the reason I take this approach to help understand that murdered and missing Indigenous women is a concern for all Canadians, not just Indigenous people. Do you think shining a light on perpetrators is a useful approach?
Absolutely. I think, okay, and let's be very clear. I always say this, in order to come up with good solutions, you have to be very clear about what the problems are. And in this case, there are certain things. Absolutely, there's violence against women perpetuated by by First Nations men. And it's usually an intimate partner violence. The way you address that is not the way that we're addressing the missing murdered women. Those are sort of the same, but they're different. Again, be clear about the problem. Why are our women, getting murdered at the hands of Indigenous men? Why is there violence, that intimate partner violence? We're working, there's different things that we're doing, but it comes from the impacts of residential school, colonial violence. That's why. How we address that is different. It's just like the reasons why young boys go missing. There are different reasons than why why girls and women are going missing and are getting murdered. Different reasons, different solutions. That's why I know people were like, oh, Mary TJ doesn't agree with about helping young boys. I never said that. I said the way that we deal with that issue of young women or young boys and men going missing, gang related, more violent, they're different solutions than missing murder women. Now, when you're coming to say like that Canadians, I've heard this absolutely, it drives me crazy. The most prolific youngest serial killer in Canadian history is Cody Lejabokov, who comes from northern British Columbia, and he killed and killed how many young girls? And I was at the trial. It was horrific. One of the things that I had to get counseling after that, and there were almost all First Nations women except for one. You look at Judge Ramsey. Judge Ramsey, for those that don't know, in northern British Columbia, there were 16 young Indigenous girls that he beat and raped and sodomized, and it was horrific. That's Judge Ramsey. I still believe that. I'm pretty sure that he killed some, because when you look at his psychopathy, definitely knowing this, that had he not been stopped, he would have definitely been murdering. So you look at all of these prolific killers, and it's opportunity, but it's also the stigmatization that comes from media, that comes from colonization, and years and years and years that Indigenous women are nothing. They're easy. They're easy women. Their lives don't matter. So I could just do whatever I want, and I could kill them. I could murder them because their lives don't matter. That's what's coming. You look at what's happening, with some of the missing, the one that was murdered, a non-Indigenous man. So this horrific violence that is happening is not happening at the hands of Indigenous men. It's happening at the hands of non-Indigenous, predominantly white men. So absolutely, we need to be very clear. And it's funny that you should ask that question. I just had a conversation just, about a month ago with a couple of women leaders, and we're saying, we need to really bring this out, because there was sort of that media thing, it's mostly Indian men killing Indian women. It's not our problem. But even if that was the case, it's Canada's problem. The impacts of residential school and colonization is Canada's problem. Doesn't matter what race, color, breed, whatever you are. It's Canada's problem.
Yeah. A question has come up related to the Highway of Tears, and they're wondering if any work has been done regarding relationship building or bystander intervention training with truck drivers to act as allies along the Highway of Tears. We've seen large social media campaigns across Canada regarding human trafficking with truck drivers. And are you aware of any of those kinds of campaigns?
We don't have one formal, but definitely it is something that we look at. I definitely know, like the human trafficking, the exploitation. We do that work. We are more concentrating on that again. We did a lot of work for a long time. There was some funding to do that. Of course, how it goes, new change of government, new priorities. So now we're just, again, robbing Peter to pay Paul to do some of this prevention work. But as far as the truck drivers piece, we have done some research before with the Firefly. It's called the research. We did it with Amnesty International, and what we looked at were those man camps and the vulnerabilities of Indigenous women around the man camps, which included the truck drivers. And so the campaign is absolutely something that I know that we're looking at again. Because I definitely know, I've heard this again and again, that the truck drivers would say, why do we keep getting blamed for this, right? So they want to be part of the solution. And so that's an absolute some of the initiatives that I've read about that are just starting up, I'm following up on, and definitely our staff will look into that.
Okay, cool. Thanks. You talked a lot about relationships and the importance of relationships and partnerships in your presentation today. And as you mentioned with government, the leaders change, they come, they go,
Mhm,
and it's the
mhm.
same with in a lot of organizations with other work. What advice can you give for maintaining these kinds of working relationships or creating effective working partnerships?
Regardless of who is there in political power, they usually have that, at the ADM level or the senior manager level, there's usually those ones there that actually are the ones that are actually doing the work. Those are the ones you spend the most time with making connections. I think about, as I was saying, so the young woman that I worked with for years, Manjeet, her name is. And she actually used to work as like she was like an assistant to the deputy minister or the assistant deputy minister. So I had a good relationship with her, but then she moved up the ranks. And so now she's in charge of the whole like the wage program. She's one of the key people there. And so maintaining that relationship. So she sort of came along with me and knew sort of the vision and being very clear. You have to be very clear about the vision because you have those shared visions, you have the shared and really, so if you're helping me, I'm helping you, like those kinds of things. But I think it's understanding the ones that are the movers and the shakers that are gonna. It's not always the minister, it's not always a premier, it's not all. It's the ones that are there that are consistently there that change with when the governments change, they're still there. That's who you spend the time. That's who you invest your money or your time and your energy. That I found, anyways. That's just my thing.
Oh, thank you very much. That's great. Somebody is curious to know if Carrier Sekani Family Services has formed a sister watch similar to the one in the downtown east side. Are you
We
familiar?
have like we're not necessarily a sister watch. We do have we're starting. We always Julie wants to call it um the what does she call it? The hot the hot women or something, the Highway of Tears watch type thing. So we
Oh.
do have in some communities they've really started up
Hmm.
their own, and we want that. Like, we want our member nations to start up. Like Notley has got a really good, they've got a really good a system and everything like that. But we do have a formal, it'd be more formalized. So if a young person goes missing, for example, like we're able to respond very quickly. We have our communications. We're able to provide support to that family. Where we're able to do that like right away. We also have the ones that we are connected with in Vancouver East Side. So we know who to contact down there if we have somebody going missing. So we do have that network that we've established when somebody goes missing through our toolkits.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So you talked about the symposium coming up next year, and there is a lot of interest in it. So people are wondering where, when, and how can they get more information?
Yeah, we're just hiring. We've just hired a person to help coordinate it. As you can imagine, there's like the logistics of that in of itself is crazy. Yeah, so I think we've already identified the space. We were going to have it like on March 6th, this is like 20 years exactly, but I think it's a week later or a few weeks later, and it's going to be in the spring of 2026, just because the venue, just again, as you said, as soon as we said that we were doing it, we've already had so much interest that we're going to probably have to do it at the Civic Center again, which is a huge venue, and because nowhere else will accommodate that many people. But for sure, if you go on our Carrier Sekani Family Services site, there is the calls for justice, Highway of Tears, and all the new information will be there.
Okay, great. We'll be sure to share that link in the emails when we send
Yeah.
out the recording. Well, I think we have time for one more question, and then and thank you so much for sharing with us today. So, somebody wants to know: is there any progress with an Amber Alert for the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls?
Yeah, we do have like we worked with Taylor Bacharach, and it seems like we're getting there. It seems positive. And again, Taylor just lost his seat. He's been the person out in the Smithers Bulkley between him and Nathan Cullen. Like when you're talking about those partnerships, you do need to have those political partnerships. Nathan and Taylor have been absolutely amazing in bringing this issue. to national attention and supporting all the work that we've done. You know, they've been to our walks with us, and it's yeah. But the Amber Alert really, Taylor Bacharach really took that upon himself, listening to us. So I do know it is at the national level right now, and we are making some headway on that. So
That's fabulous.
yeah. Hmm.
Just one more comment here, and I think it was echoed by many, that Mary, you're an amazing change maker and you bring so much value to society. And people are dying to know if you're doing lots of public training or and how they can access you.
Okay. Public training. Okay, yeah, for sure. You'll have. I think we did leave um the Veronica and Kelsey's email that's on the there. There's also the CSFS, but you for sure my email is easy as well. It's mary@csfs.org. I don't mind. You can always Google me. You can find me, so I don't mind reaching out directly to me.
Well, thanks so much, Mary. Really appreciate the time you've spent with us today and such a great presentation. I think Laura's going to put some screens or some slides back onto the screen for us for a moment. So just before we sign off, we'd like to take a moment for some reminders and some closing remarks. So thank you, Mary. We also want to thank the ASL interpreters today, Carmel and Jamie, and the French language interpreters, Carolyn and Wendy. And a special thank you also to the Learning Network and Knowledge Hub teams who have been in the background doing all of the things that make these productions so successful.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I just assumed, and I should never assume, but is there elder or somebody that's going to be closing us in a good way, considering we've talked about this very sacred topic?
Sorry that there is not. I'm sorry about that. No,
I can do a prayer.
I
I
would
can do a
appreciate
prayer.
that.
I'll do a closing prayer.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, I'll do it in English.
Thank you.
Okay. Creator, Simalaka Takai, Yakasta, would like to thank you for this beautiful day that you have given us of life. I'd like to thank you for keeping us and our families safe today. Every time we come together to make the world a better place, we know your presence is there. You allow us to share our energy, our spirit, and minds, and we thank you for this. Thank you personally for allowing me to have the pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to all these beautiful people. These beautiful people are giving me their energy and spirit so that we can continue to do this good work together. Thank you for giving us the intellect so that we can understand what we're talking about. Thank you for giving us the patience and the empathy of our hearts so that we can help each other. Thank you for giving us the strength of spirit so that we can continue this work together. What's up, all my relations? Amen.
Thank you for those words, Mary, and thank you for helping us close in a good way. So just as we're leaving, we do have two webinars coming up in June. One on June the 19th on strengthening relationships and responses for elder mistreatment. And the other one shortly thereafter on June the 24th, which will be about Nowhere to Go, confronting Canada's housing crisis and advocating for change for survivors of gender-based violence. So the links are available on the Learning Network and Knowledge Hub webpage, and you'll be able to register for them there. And just one final reminder that coming up on October 1st and 2nd, the Knowledge Hub is presenting a conference, Innovations in Addressing Gender-Based Violence and Trauma and Violence-Informed Health Promotion. Registration is also available, so you mark that date and registration is available on our webpage. And the link will be available in the chat as well, I believe. So thank you very much to everyone today for participating. You'll be able to get a certificate of participation. A link will come up as we close off this webinar. Thank you, everyone.